back to an episode of the Open Source Cafe, and today we have Peleg here with us from Configu. Really excited for this session. We're going to talk about configuration as code. But before we get started and dive into the session, Peleg, would you like to give yourself a quick intro? Tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Of course. So, hey Kunal, hey everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Peleg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Configu. Founded Configu along with my good friends Ron, which is a Configu CTO. Both of us been software developers about a decade. I started as a DevOps engineer and then moved to low-level security. And founded Configu out of a personal frustration around software configuration, and we want to fix it for everyone, not just for us.
Amazing, and we're going to talk about various domains and sorts of things. But from your experience, when you talk to organizations, what are some of the key challenges that they face when it comes to managing configurations in their systems?
So basically, we founded Configu out of personal issues that we suffered from. We suffered from configuration issues. No matter that I worked in big corporates and his whole career was in startups. No matter that he comes from full stack JavaScript development, I'm from low-level security. My previous job was developing Golang. So both of us issues the same problem, and the main that we see as the main challenge is that today's configuration, and we're talking about application configuration, not the infrastructure. I think that we will talk about it in a couple of questions. But today, application configuration are too fragmented, and most of the companies, let's say the average company, handle 5 to 10 different places that they are storing their configuration in, from files in their Git repo, which is duplicated for each one of their environments, to secret managers, feature flag solutions, and yada yada. And it's really, really hurt the collaboration and made the development process so hard to maintain, lead to misconfiguration, which is a main problem.
I couldn't agree more. And to be quite frank, I have recently only discovered Configu. And by the way, pretty cool stuff you're doing. So I'd encourage folks also it's open source, so what's not to love? You can show some support. Go start the repo. Check out the links in the description below. We'll do some more content later on. But for folks who may not be familiar with the term configuration as code, can you maybe describe what it means and how it differs from traditional configuration management approaches?
Of course. So configuration as code is let's say it's a new and old term. Like the most common one is infrastructure as code, and when we at Configu created our technology, we basically got inspired from infrastructure as code and adapt the technology of how we saw the best practices of infrastructure and code and how much it loved by developers. So as developers, we adapt the motion and created our assets and the base technology of Configu to be on top of configuration as code, which is fully open source under the Configu repo. And the configuration as code is basically code or entity. It could be JSON or YAML. It doesn't really matter. And it basically describe and create a schema of your application. So you could, as a developer, easily develop and maintain your configuration during code development. Basically, everything in Configu is above configuration as code approach.
Right. And someone might be wondering, okay, this is all cool, but what might be the benefits, of using configuration as code in terms of, let's say, scalability and collaboration within the development and operations team? So if someone is wondering, this is cool, but how is it going to benefit me? How do you pitch it to people?
Yeah, I guess the question is talk about for itself. Like configuration as code is the most GitOps approach. So it's basically divide between the keys, which is the structure or the placeholders inside the code, and the values, which are most of them sensitive or non-sensitive. It doesn't really matter, and there are change between environments or different environments. So splitting between them and creating an asset of configuration as a code, which is saved in your Git repo and maintained by the developers, super GitOps approach, and it helps to make it more scalable. The collaboration is happened using the Git, no matter which hosting. So let's say host my code in GitHub. So my schemas, which are the configuration as code assets, are saved in my Git repository. Me as a developer, I can easily change the file like that they're sitting with my code. I can do everything locally, and then if I need, I can take it to the next step and save it on a third-party platform using the configuration as code approach.
And you mentioned Git, so maybe you can shed some light on how configuration as code can also help with version control and tracking changes to configurations over time. Because you mentioned it's a new old thing. So how are things going to change, like future?
Of course. So it depends if tracking, you mean tracking the structure or tracking the values, because the best practice is not to save values inside Git repos. It's not secure enough. It's not dedicated or aiming to manage configuration. It's only refer configuration as a text file or a key value pairs. So if you divide between them and saved only the configuration as code assets, which are the schemas that describe the service, you can follow and track everything, versions and everything by tracking the Git logs or the change log, no matter if it's the main branch or any other branch. And if you want to track the values, you can use any third party that you're already using, and the Configu interface, no matter if it's CLI or SDK, can synchronize and connect to any third-party storage system for configuration, let's say Secret Manager, let's say database, or even param store. And of course, we have the Configu platform on top of it. You can choose Configu platform and track everything from value to value changes and history in the third-party system, following the best practice of managing configuration.
Amazing. So thanks a lot for sharing about configuration as code and the benefits and stuff. Really learning a lot. And now to the next part, which is how do we get started? So I'm not going to. The question is basically like if you can suggest any tools. So obviously Configu. So ideally, if you can tell us a little bit more about Configu, how that works, being open sourced, and how folks can get started.
Of course. So the idea behind Configu is to create a unified interface that can control. We mentioned that there are several places to save configuration on, or let's say that configuration on two fragments. So Configu as an unified interface, it can seamlessly connect to any configuration system that you use, and it's an open source. So if it does not support the config storage that you are using, you can implement it by yourself or contribute for the benefits of other. But it seamlessly can connect to any one of the big options. Like, let's say I work with AWS Parameter Store and AWS Secret Manager, for example, some file in my Git repo. So Configu will use automatically, it will use my IAM file and connect to my AWS. If I don't have IAM file in my computer, I can connect using the AWS CLI, or I can create or connect using .cfgu, .configu, file, and mention the parameters of my AWS, same as other storage system, HashiCorp files. I can mention the path to the file, databases, and etc. So it can seamlessly connect to any tool, of course, to the Configu platform, which is our enterprise product on top of everything. It will seamlessly connect and give you a unified interface you can use to create, maintain, delete, or any activity that you want to do on top of the configuration. So you can manage everything using a unified interface on top of the technology of configuration as a code, and simply automate everything and do it secured and safe using test environment and every other benefit that Configu is offered.
Pretty cool. I'm looking forward to doing my tutorial on it as well, because we do a lot of boot camps and stuff, and I'm happy to share about such open source projects. But you mentioned in the previous answer about security. Can you maybe touch upon that a little bit more? Like, how does, so we can talk about configuration as code. What are some of the key things to keep in mind security wise, and maybe any practices or stuff related to compliance that you'd like to share for folks who may not have used it before, and just some of the things to keep in mind?
So the first thing you need to keep in mind is that avoid keeping secrets inside your code or even inside non-sensitive configuration formats like .env or JSON or YAMLs on your Git repository. Try to split it out to a third-party solution, any secret manager that you worked with. Of course, it's relevant for other non-sensitive configuration, but the most priority when we're talking about security is how we handle and manage secret manager. And in most cases, we're talking with companies that even though they're using secret managers, most of the time there are manual parts that they did not automate, and they just insert and export configuration from and to the secret manager. And then there is a manual part that they are combine it with their non-sensitive configuration, or even inject them to any, Kubernetes environment using Kubernetes CLI. So be aware that even though if you're using Secret Manager, there are still some parts that you need to automate. You need to automate or avoid manual work, like sending secrets using communication platforms such as Slack or Discord or others. It's not secure. If you're working with Configu, for example, you can automate everything using the unified interface and even inject them into your Kubernetes environment seamlessly without export or handling everything locally on your computer.
Amazing. And you mentioned about, let's talk a little bit more about DevOps, for folks, the DevOps professionals. Do you have any best practices for implementing configuration management and specifically configuration as code in a DevOps environment? Maybe you can talk, I believe you answered this already, but if you can just point them to like a point to start, like where they can get started, and how do they get started with their journey? Yeah.
Of course. So we need to define what is configuration management. Most of the time, DevOps will handle the infrastructure part, which there are many good configuration management for the infrastructure part. And of course, there are solutions like Terraform or others who can handle the everything as a code, with infrastructure as a code approach and others. When we're looking on the Configu domain, or what we're handling, which is all the configuration that related directly to the code itself, to the application, it's not the infrastructure level, it's the application level. And if you want to start managing it better than text files, or just divide it to too many configuration stores, you can start using Configu open source. It will automatically connect to any one of your existing solutions, so you don't need to change anything. You don't need to change anything in your code, in your infrastructure, in the config storages, just use the open source, connect everything, and start managing using a unified interface. No matter if you're DevOps or developer, it's two sides of the same coin. Like if you're a developer, you're start developing and maintaining the configuration inside the code. This is the reason we choose to work with configuration as code for the developers. And if you're looking at it from the DevOps perspective, so Configu help you to combine and connect between the application part and the infrastructure by integrating from the application part to the infrastructure, like integrating directly to Kubernetes, directly to your AWS, to Terraform and others.
Can you touch upon that a little bit? You mentioned about infrastructure as code. So between configuration as code and infrastructure as code, can you maybe combine these two practices and for the benefits?
Of course, let's imagine a use case, for example, that I'm using Terraform, and I can automatically create for each branch that I'm opening. I can generate an infrastructure environment or environment using infrastructure as code, my Terraform. And then it will generate some application layer configurations, such as my server addresses, my connection string to the databases, and every type of configuration that I'm using inside my application. This is the part that Configu is going in. It will connect to the Terraform. The Terraform will add and insert all the new configuration directly to Configu, which will store it for you. Then you can manage everything using Configu. And at the end, if you change something runtime or offline, you can just inject everything by combining it to your CI/CD process or directly to your Terraform or Kubernetes. So it basically making the configuration process smoothly, effortless, automatically, without any misconfiguration, of course, because we have a testing layer, and you can combine the infrastructure along with the application.
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing. And one question that we did not speak about, whenever I get introduced to a new concept, I ask this: do you think there are any misconceptions or common pitfalls that projects and organizations should be aware of when they're adopting configuration as code? And maybe you can also share how to work around those, if there are any.
If you need to aware, Configu has a lot of new concepts that you need to be aware to, especially for talking about configuration as a code. There are new terms. You need to be aware of where you're storing your configuration, how to work with any config store that you choose, and basically it's really, really easy to do that. You only need to just make a decision and start managing or change the way that you are managing configurations to be better processes. Like as a code, it will help you to change everything for the better. The developer will love it or will better love it. And DevOps, it will help them to maintain everything in the organization layer.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing, and it's really great talking to you. For folks, you can check out the links in the description below, and I really appreciate Peleg for you to give the time and answer all my questions. You can visit configu.com to learn more. We'll be doing more such sessions. We'll be doing some live ones like Twitter Spaces, webinars, AMA sessions shortly. But yeah, it has been a lot of fun, and just getting started. This was an introductory video for the concept, and we'll be diving deep into it, some hands-on experiences as well. But yeah, thanks for joining, Peleg. Really appreciate you giving the time from your schedule, and yeah, just really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kunal, for hosting me, and thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah, and it's open source, just as a quick reminder, so you can give it a hit up star, join the community, check out the issues, or suggest something, if you end up using it. But yeah.
and next month is Oktoberfest. So
Yeah, Hacktoberfest is coming.
next month is Hackfest. Feel free to join and contribute Configu.
All right. Well, you heard it, and looking forward to it. See you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.